Good morning. I'd like to go ahead and call the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting to order for Thursday, March 21st. Thank you so much for being here. Commissioner Vice Chair Van Brocklin will be joining us by phone, and so bear with us and offer us a tad bit of grace as we work through that today. And so, Dr. Garrett, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity, but I am going to yield my time to Chris Strickler and Mac Lynn. Mother Nature over the last month has bloodied our nose here in the state of Oregon, and I think it's important for us to show how the men and women of ODOT maintenance of this agency engaged to take on a winter storm that actually reached from southern up into the Portland metro area to central to eastern Oregon. So I'd let these gentlemen do a quick presentation, show you what we have dealt with and how we have dealt with it. So with that, Chris.
Madam Chair and members of the Commission, thank you for the time. I'll be brief and turn it over to Mac to walk you through the presentation, but I really wanted to just say thank you for the opportunity and thank you to the Director for the opportunity to really share the experiences, frankly, that have all occurred in about the last 4 to 6 weeks. I know that the weather as of late wouldn't necessarily tell you that we've been dealing with some of the things that you'll see on the slides, but frankly our crews have been, and they've been doing a fantastic job and really in circumstances that go above and beyond. And so thank you for the opportunity to share what they've been going through. I'm sure they'll appreciate it.
Good. So members of the Commission, thank you, Mac Lynn, Deputy Highway Division Administrator. We also gave a similar presentation to the Joint Committee on Transportation, in the legislature recently as well. So I'll walk through this fairly quickly. Just starting out, there's our trip check viewpoint, and you can see a lot of red on there. It got way worse on February 25th, kind of the culmination of the big event. Over 400,000 people hit our trip check site that day. So 400,000 individual kind of hits on our website. So a very powerful tool in getting information out. One thing I'll note is a lot of power outages in the southern Oregon part of the state that week, and so really limited our ability to show people what was going on, but in terms of trip check being a fantastic tool for us. So I just want to walk across the state for you. The Columbia River Gorge was a dynamic situation earlier in the event. If you recall, we've had successive winter storms kind of roll through the state, and some real challenges as we had to close down I-84. We had some people unfortunately stuck in that location for quite a number of hours due to just very bad conditions and our ability to respond in that tight corridor of traffic, as well as concrete barriers in there. So just a dynamic scene. We do have a great video of it, but in essence of time, I would kind of pull that out of this. But this is a screenshot of that video. So what you're seeing on the left is traffic heading towards Portland from the Hood River area, and you can see the amount of trucks we were dealing with. This was after we'd gotten all the passenger vehicles out of there in terms of the conditions our crews were dealing with. So in Region 2, snow kind of everywhere, which is not common, of course, in the valley to the coast range to the mountains is a different set of circumstances. But up and over the coast range, certainly dealing with a fair amount of snow. Here in Salem, quite a bit of snow in various places. And that line, as you move to the north towards Portland, sure varied depending on the snow, depending on the day. There's a number of folks, obviously, in our building driving down every day, giving us real-time feedback of where that freezing line is. But you can see just north of Kaiser here, just some of the situations we were dealing with, or our crews were dealing with. Especially, I think the biggest impact was just traffic accidents and just people maybe not being prepared for it. And of course, the weather forecasters dealing with a very dynamic series of storms. So not maybe their comfort level of predicting this was low as well. Our incident responders certainly play a key role in our response out on the roadways across the state in helping those people that are experiencing some traffic conditions that they weren't prepared for. Snow in the mountains, tons and tons and tons of snow. Coast range certainly got hammered, and as farther south you went, the higher it got. There's obviously record-setting levels in some of our pass areas. Not without some challenges up on the Santiam Pass, which I know Commissioner Bainey, you certainly experienced this with your drive over. 10 years ago or so was the last time we dealt with avalanches on Santiam Pass, so we do experience this, but very infrequently. This gentleman actually walked away from this, or I believe he was out of the vehicle at this point when the avalanche came down. We brought in resources to help us, from Central Oregon because we just don't deal with avalanches. So we actually blasted the avalanche chutes open. That's just not something that we're routinely dealing with. Trees. So Southern Oregon, Highway 58 going to Oak Ridge. I'm sure you've heard the media accounts of that. The Amtrak passenger train was stuck there as well. And then in Oak Ridge, you couldn't get in or out of Oak Ridge from Central Oregon or from the Willamette Valley. So just a lot of trees and down power lines that our crews are dealing with. So this is Highway 58, major freight corridor going into Oak Ridge. We had contractors, lots of contractors out there trying to help us, and just the conditions were very dynamic. This is one of their vehicles. So we pulled people out of that multiple times just because trees were still falling down and just it was not safe. Relied heavily on our contracting crews. So this is one of them here helping to remove some of the material and get the road open. As soon as we had a route through there that we were comfortable with, we started piloting people so they could get in and out of that community. Also led a lifeline tour and a media tour into that, just to make sure people were able to get in and out. Fuel was a big piece of that. A lot of people, because Oak Ridge was out of power for so long, leaving to come to the valley to get fuel, generators, propane, etc. This is my favorite picture because you don't think about this being the Department of Transportation, but we had to get to some radio towers that were experiencing electrical outages, as well as backup generator failures because they needed to be running for so long. So this is our crews going in 14 miles over 2.5 days to get to one of our significant radio towers at Santiam Junction. We were relying on satellite phones because the radio system that we and OSP rely on was down. So a dramatic series of events. So Region 3, you know, the Siskiyous, they're used to the snow, but they got hammered as well in this event. Northern California early on was really hampered by the snow, and so we certainly dealt with that coming up and over the Siskiyous Pass. And we've got a great video here that we shot early in the winter that I think really resonates with our crews that are out there on the road and then what we do in those areas where we know we're going to have challenges. So Jackie, I'll look to you to start that for us.
One of the few tools that we have that nobody else has.
Oh, that.
One of the few tools that we have that nobody else has. Obviously, the term push truck allows me to do just that. I don't have to pull it. If I can catch them on the fly while they're spinning, we're going to be going up the hill.
So that's
a good sign.
That truck's known as the Bulldog. We also have the Tasmanian Devil. So a little humor in trying to keep the road open. Cottage Grove, another significant area down power lines on the freeway. Had some folks stranded down there as well as we tried to get those down power lines out of the way to get the road open. Flooding, we're still watching that across the state, especially on the eastern Oregon side of the state. Burns is probably the biggest area we focus on, just the way that valley doesn't drain when they have significant mountain snow. Highway 138 and 38, Commissioner Callery and Commissioner Brown, I'm sure you've seen some of this as you're commuting up here. Just dynamic events, just the amount of trees down in that part of the state was incredible. I drove Highway 38 recently, and the word I use is carnage, and that's even after we got the road open. We're going to continue to work on that clear through this summer. Central Oregon, what I'm hearing is just a lot of snow. Commissioner Manny, I'm sure you can appreciate that. But certainly challenges on Highway 97 and other roads. Our incident responders working to keep the roads open as quickly as we can, but not without its challenges. And lastly, just Region 5, they have been in weeks and weeks and weeks of snow, 50 some days, if you will, in some areas of continual snow. So our reliance on state troopers and other partners to keep the roads open as best we can, but we're certainly challenged. This is a shot east of La Grande towards Baker City, just the amount of trucks that were staging to queue up to get through that section of the state as well as through the gorge when it had to be closed was incredible, running out of places to put them. And then just want to acknowledge our technology. So on the left is one of our dual wing plows that's new to our fleet the last few years, as well as the tow plow. So this is the trailer that goes behind the truck that also has a blade on it. Just our ability to efficiently get the material off the road faster. Snow blowers, we had all of them running 24/7 across the state. We were asked to send one to Reno, Nevada, and didn't have to, but just the challenges across the state across the West were extensive. And then lastly, just want to acknowledge some of the conditions our workers are trying to get to and from work in. So some of them are housed on site, and just challenges having to shovel off their roofs before they started their day of work. And then being able to get to the equipment, the gas, the materials that they needed, and then just get to and from their home. So lastly, want to end with Hooskanadan Slide down on Highway 101. This is just north of Brookings, 12 miles north of Brookings. A fairly dramatic historical ancient landslide decided to move at the same time and move a lot. It moved laterally about 100 feet and moved vertically upwards of 50. So that road has been closed. There's not a great detour option. We do have one in place, but probably the biggest impact to freight. And these are some of the pictures of a few weeks ago where our contractor Tidewater Contractors out of Brookings is helping to open that up. And right now we've got it open to 1 lane of gravel. So we can at least get commerce, people, and freight through there. But the long-term approach is going to be, we need the slide to stop moving first and foremost, and then work towards likely getting asphalt in place sometime this summer, but getting it to 2 lanes as fast as we can. So this is a recent picture from yesterday, just what we're dealing with on that project. So with that, that's kind of a run through of what we've been dealing with.
So how in depth on that last image on that last road are like in terms of engineering and geotech? Like how significant and important and vital is that conversation and relationship with those individuals to ensure that when we do move forward with laying asphalt that we're not susceptible to this taking place again?
Yes, my opinion, Commissioner Brown, is there's no permanent fix there that's feasible. All right, we're really talking a bridge over a mile length on a area that constantly moves, so nothing's probably forever permanent, but as permanent as we can be. So we last did this 10 or 15 years ago as well, and there's a couple slides in that part of the state that just move frequently, and hopefully less frequently is the goal. We had OSU with their LiDAR equipment out earlier this week to do some analysis, and we'll continue doing that analysis to try to get the best fix in place, but I'd certainly defer to Chris on this. I don't think there's a permanent repair that we probably have the money to do.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Simpson, I would say Mac hit it well, which is in an area where you have constant movement. Candidly, it's a bit nerve-wracking to even get to this point where we've got people traveling on 1 lane of traffic. Now, it's perfectly safe, but it's not the best of circumstances when we're trying to construct a roadway through that area. We will be going through a geotechnical analysis before we put kind of a permanent solution in place. I will tell you, in a historic area like this, for such a large section, the alternatives are limited because you really have to avoid the area altogether as your kind of secondary option. So.
I would just like to say thank you very much. I suspect that we have some lessons learned here and things that would be applicable to a Cascadia event, and I'm hopeful that we wrap that into those discussions as we go forward. At the end of the day, the individuals that are making sure that our roadways are safe and that are responding, often we think about police and fire, and while 2 of my brothers happen to be in fire service, the men and women that, as Director Garrett would say, suit up every day to do this work, they too have families or homes that they needed to get out of and attend to. And I just I don't have words to express the gratitude of what they do every day to make sure that our communities are safe and that we can get the necessary materials and services to, we're talking about medications and fuel and basic things. These events teach us something every time about what's in front of us as well. And so to the individuals that have made the choice to have ODOT be their home, I just wanted to say thank you so much to them. I know we're going to look for ways that we can express that gratitude as we go forward. But this was a significant statewide event, and we responded with our A game. And I'm really proud of the team and just wanted to say thank you for sharing their work, but also if you could convey to the team our gratitude for, and that although we don't see them individually, we do see their work, and we appreciate that they too have lives that they need to tend to, and as well as tend to making sure that everyone else is safe. So just really appreciative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good. Thanks for letting us do that.
Director Garrett, anything else?
No, Madam Chair, again, just thank you for allowing us to share the story.
Absolutely. Okay, next we have public comment, and I have 2 individuals that have signed up. So if I don't call your name and you're interested, please wave, jump up, signal in some fashion. Mr. Courtwright, I'd like to invite you. Great to see you this morning. Please do hit the button and state your name, and the floor is yours. It's okay. It'll be a theme throughout the day. You'll just be the first.
How about now? Yes, excellent. Chair Boehne, commissioners, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. For those of you who I haven't met, let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Courtwright. Before I retired a couple of years ago, for 25 years, I served as the lead staff at the Department of Land Conservation and Development on transportation planning issues. Over the last year, I've appeared in front of this commission with Chris Hagerbommer of the Oregon Environmental Council to encourage you to take action to address greenhouse gas emission reduction and to adopt and implement the statewide transportation strategy. I want to start today by applauding you for last summer adopting the statewide transportation strategy, and for earlier this year adopting a work program that commits you to identify a schedule of actions to implement the statewide transportation strategy over the next year. At the same time, while these efforts are really important and significant, they're only first steps. Much more is needed and quickly to effectively respond to the climate change crisis that we face. Every month, it seems, we receive new scientific information showing that our climate is changing more rapidly than previously predicted, and advising that substantial, even heroic efforts will be needed to reduce emissions over the next decade to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Given this scientific information and your direction, we're anxious that state agencies take whatever steps they can to move forward with emission reduction while we wait for the legislature to resolve the details of the Clean Energy and Jobs Act. As my chart in the letter that you have in front of you shows, there's a significant need and opportunity in dealing with metropolitan transportation plans. Here are the key messages in this chart. First, over the next 3 years, most of the state's metropolitan areas will adopt new long-range plans that extend to the year 2045, almost all of the time we have available to meet our emission reduction goals. Sadly, those current plans will increase rather than reduce greenhouse gas emissions. As a benchmark, the STS says we need to reduce the amount of driving that Oregonians do by about 23% if we're going to meet our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. But those current adopted plans estimate, except for Portland, that VMT per capita, the amount of driving we do, is going to increase between now and 2035 by about 1 to 3%. In short, we're going in the wrong direction. The opportunity that we have to address this in metropolitan transportation plans is quickly passing us by, because those metropolitan areas are conducting what I would call business as usual updates to plans. They're not really addressing greenhouse gas emissions. They're not estimating outcomes, and they're not shooting to meet the state's targets for emission reductions. The next 12 to 18 months are really critical in the way that we shape those plans. I raise this to you because ODOT has a key role in supporting and shaping metropolitan plans. You provide substantial technical and financial assistance to metropolitan areas. Your staff serves on the technical and policy advisory committees that help advise metropolitan plans, so you're in a position to help boost the efforts that metropolitan areas make. I know you have a long-term discussion to have about how we implement the STS, but there are 3 things I think you can do to make progress in the short term. First, help MPOs. Expand and, as necessary, redirect the resources and support you already provide to help metropolitan areas estimate greenhouse gas emission outcomes of their plans and consider strategies that will accomplish greenhouse gas emission reduction. Second, advise the legislature as it develops House Bill 2020 about the need for metropolitan area planning and the status of metropolitan area planning. We've talked about where we are with Metro and the statewide transportation strategy, but we really haven't talked to the legislature about how far behind we are in our other metropolitan areas. Third, let me encourage you to start work or ask the department to start work on performance measures. Last year, you amended the Oregon Transportation Plan to put ODOT on the path of using performance measures to guide planning. One of the performance measures that you should consider is greenhouse gas emission reductions, as well as performance measures to implement the statewide transportation strategy. All of those things you can get in motion so that we can hit the ground running when the legislature completes its work on House Bill 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Courtwright. Do we have questions or comments?
I had a quick question for Mr. Courtwright. Do you engage a lot with the other state agencies as it relates to supporting this, I guess, concept or idea of more dense development?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I was testifying to the Land Conservation and Development Commission last year when they were considering rulemaking to address this issue.
Great. Because I'm just curious about that, because obviously they're synonymous. I mean, there's a role that the agency plays, but obviously there's roles that others play as well.
Absolutely.
And to me, it always comes back to the plans that are on the ground initially from the local jurisdictions in terms of what it is they see as community, and then what does the agency do to support them build and sustain a more environmentally conscious community.
There's no question that it's a comprehensive package, and that's the way that we've tried to approach it over the last 15 or 20 years. I think what we found is we really need to redouble those efforts to promote the kind of development that makes it convenient for people to drive less.
So, Director Garrett, if we could bookmark this for a discussion. I know that we are looking for ways to enhance our engagement with MPOs and that connection with the OTC and with the department. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I would also call out, which I'm not sure if you might be aware or not, under Director Garrett's leadership, we have started convening discussions with our sister agencies to make sure that we are doing this work, the SDS work, together. We know that we are one partner in this work, and we want to make sure that we are in lockstep with our other sister agencies as we go forward.
I am aware of that work, and I'm very impressed by it and hope it succeeds. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you. Next, I have Ms. Nassett. Good to see you, and looks like the microphone is already on, and so please state your name, and wonderful to see you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Council, Commission. For the record, my name is Sharon Nassett, and I was thinking that was very nice that he left it on. Last time I had a problem, I kept pushing it. Thank you very much, actually, for having citizen comment. And, you know, it's really, really important. And I come down from Portland here and then, you know, go over to the Capitol for a little bit because I do believe very much that you participate, you care, you think, and that you evolve things. I would not spend any time in a situation that I didn't think was that way. So I really want you to know that I appreciate that. I would like to talk to you about I-84 and I-5 interchange in Portland, Oregon. In 2000, when our group came in with the West Side Alternative, we also came into a realignment of the I-84. And the I-5 Trade and Transportation Partnership did do a partial markup of it, which was pretty good. Unfortunately, at the time, Veracats removed it, going against NEPA policy. You probably know that the meeting they just had, and I'm going to bring that up first, first it was on the media, it'd be very contentious. Then it is limited parking, cash only, $15. You had to come in at 4:30 to 6 o'clock to sign up, but there's no time certain of when you could speak. Nobody can sign up for you. You're only going to have 2 minutes. The bus stop closest in both directions was closed. So when you got off in the dark, you were going to walk, and then it started raining. This is the outreach that we have had for I-84. And 2 minutes once you got there. And going forward with something that is obvious that the citizens do not want, don't want, will not work, does not want, changes our neighborhood. When there are alternatives that do work, that they have been put out there, they are not being brought to the attention because the people who were putting out the process would not accept anything other than doing social engineering on top. Adding any lanes to I-5 freeway there is adding to a parking lot. The process that's here, and I know my time is up soon, has pictures of a realignment, giving about 1.5 miles of a realignment of I-84, removing the most dangerous interchange of I-5, I-84, and making it so thousands of vehicles never have to go on to I-5 to access I-84. It also has a way for the vehicles that are headed into that area that come from the south to get off at the current exit we have at the Oregon Convention Center. Not going up over the hill, not after I-84. It's all in the right-of-way, very little pollution, and it's all on removing weaves and safety. I would like for a firm consideration of this. I don't know if you heard of the No Freeway people, because it's funny that No Freeway and I've been pushing for an additional freeway, and I work together a little bit. Talked with them and others on this, but you can't have something like that to keep everybody out because you're so much better than this, and I don't think that you realized that this is, and it was still contentious. I just didn't go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you have materials for us to review, we do look at them and are very appreciative of your engagement. So if there's something that you want us to review, there it is. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, yes.
Oh, right here. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, so I will review that. It's at our place. So
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. As always, great to see you. Okay, so that concludes the public comment, unless anyone else would like to signal that you're interested. Okay, so we will now move on to item C, an update of the legislative activity happening across the street. Ms. Baker, wonderful to see you. Are we keeping you busy enough?
Absolutely.
Oh, good. All right, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair Bainey, members of the Commission. For the record, Lindsay Baker, Government Relations Manager here at the Department of Transportation. So I'll just do sort of a high-level flyover, understanding with my general caveat that things are constantly changing by a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-by-minute basis. So when I was before you last month in February, I had shared with you that we have been off to a little bit of a slow start, particularly in our Joint Committee on Transportation. I'll recall, or you'll recall at least, that the session deadlines for joint committees are a little bit more flexible. So right now, just by way of reminder, March the 29th is the date that all policy committees in the legislature are required to post bills for a work session, which means that this next couple of weeks are really the crunch time when we're seeing bills posted to agendas. We're getting requests for fiscal amendments are really churning. Things are sort of flying through the process. And we've really been feeling that, and at least me and my staff in the director's office have really been feeling that as well. The joint committee, because it is a joint committee, right? So it's bicameral, does not have those same deadlines, and so they have really been looking forward to a May 24th deadline by when they want to be moving some bills. So as I mentioned last time I was here, we've been doing a lot of informational hearings, particularly since we've got a lot of members of our Joint Committee on Transportation that are new to that committee, some of whom who are really actually pretty new to the program era. So we were doing a lot of sort of foundation building, reminding who we are as an agency, what the House Bill 2017 package was and what it did and how we're moving forward on implementation, right, really establishing that baseline. So we did a lot of those. We did a lot of public hearings on various bills. I talked a little bit about the speed bill, some of the photo radar bills, those sorts of things. And then the next couple of weeks, we're really starting to see bills posted for work sessions. Bills are starting to sort of move through the process. The other thing I mentioned to you last time when I was before you was our budget hearings. So we we were in front of our Joint Committee on Ways and Means Subcommittee on Transportation and Economic Development. I think it was the beginning of March, I think it was March 4th, 5th, and 6th earlier this month. We had 2.5 days, so 3 days total, including public comment, but 2.5 days to really dive deep into our agency. We did a division by division look at operating budget, at where all of our revenues are coming from, how many people we have across the agency to really be delivering on the work of ODOT. As I mentioned, in the Joint Committee on Transportation, we had a lot of new faces. In the Joint Committee, or excuse me, the Ways and Means Committee, our subcommittee on transportation, we have a lot of new faces. I think we've got 2 members that have served on that subcommittee previously, and the rest of them are really brand new to that program area. So again, right, the theme I think that I've been observing this session, at least as it comes to our legislative engagement and our committees, has really been, let's build up the foundation and make sure that we're all working from that same base of knowledge. So we did a lot of that work. I think it was quite successful in my estimation. Committee members were asking really, really good questions, and I think we were able to strike the right level of information for that first round of budget hearing. We will be back in front of the subcommittee, our Ways and Means subcommittee, April 15th and 16th for what's sort of known as the phase 2 of budget hearing. We don't really know yet what they're going to be interested in diving into more detail, but that phase 2 process is really to dive into a little bit more detail. So we'll look forward to working with you all and working with our subcommittee members as we figure out sort of where they want to be spending some more time and focus on. Another set of bills I'll talk a little bit about in more detail is bills as related to TNCs, what's known as transportation network companies. So think of the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, right? You trying to do a ride sharing or ride hailing via an app on your phone. So we are one of the only states, I think we are maybe the only state in the country, that does not have any state law in this space. So I will emphasize the fact that across the other 49 states that have something, it really is a range of spectrum in terms of the level of regulation that's envisioned or that's established in those various states. But it is accurate to say that Oregon is the only state that has no statewide law in this space. So I think the legislature has really been dealing with this issue for the past 4 or 5 sessions, I believe, figuring out what do we as a state want to be regulating, if at all, and if the answer is yes, we want to regulate, how do we actually do that? And maybe perhaps what is the right agency to be tasked with that role, considering, right, as you all have had conversations about emerging technology, this space changes really rapidly, and I think it's difficult to figure out where exactly is the perfect fit in a state government system. So sort of on the table right now, and it's the House Committee on Business and Labor, interestingly, not the Joint Committee on Transportation that's really been tasked with looking at this issue. But interestingly, there are 2 sort of proposals on the table right now. So there's one bill that envisions a statewide regulatory process. Right now, the bill has ODOT actually administering an oversight and regulatory system of TNCs in the state. And then there's a second bill that really allows local governments to sort of do what they want and regulate this space. It sets a floor for what that regulatory scheme must look like and the types of insurance levels, types of background checks, vehicle safety inspections that have to be required. But it really gives that authority to local governments to administer for their communities. So in my mind, that's the first policy choice that the legislature needs to make. What sort of system are you envisioning, a statewide system or a more local system? And I think once the legislature makes that determination, and if that determination is indeed we're going to a statewide system, I think ODOT is likely the agency that will be tasked with administering it. So all this to say the conversation is still evolving. We are continuing to engage legislators and stakeholders to try to really figure out, if it comes to ODOT, what is our expectation and what's our role of engagement. That's one. The next bill I'll mention briefly is House Bill 2881. This is a bill that I talked a little bit about before. It came from the Road User Fee Task Force, RUF-TUF. You all are familiar with the road use charge program that we have right now that was really set up after Senate Bill 810, which passed during the 2013 session, directed ODOT to stand up a pilot program. Let's sort of look at a voluntary system by which we would charge road usage charges. And so we've been administering that for the past 5 years. It's been successful. We've got a number of drivers and vehicles that are enrolled in the program right now, and sort of able to demonstrate that it is a workable concept and a workable construct. So the Road User Fee Task Force met last summer and voted to move forward with drafting a legislative concept that has now become House Bill 2881. It got its first public hearing last week, I believe, maybe the week before. And I think committee members and the Joint Committee on Transportation were generally receptive to sort of moving the ball forward, right? It's an iterative process, an incremental step to having this program be a little bit more formal. So it makes a various number of programmatic changes, including eliminating the cap on the number of vehicles that can be in the program, making sure that you're only really targeting those high mileage, high fuel efficiency vehicles, eliminating the refund provision, and then and essentially sort of establishing, if the program is not made mandatory by 2025, let's revisit the conversation and figure out whether or not we want to continue to just have a pilot program in perpetuity. So that bill was posted for a work session, and it'll be worked next week, next Wednesday, I believe, out of the Joint Committee. And I think we're feeling quite optimistic that it's a step in the right direction. The last thing I will mention is we've had some conversations about this, the $10 million from the Special Transportation Fund. So we've had some really good conversations with the co-chairs of Ways and Means, and the co-chairs did release their co-chair budget framework 2 weeks ago, a couple Fridays ago, and $10 million was included of general fund in the Special Transportation Fund in the co-chair's budget. So we're feeling very optimistic that that cut was restored, and look forward to continuing to have that conversation with our Ways and Means co-chairs. The final thing I will note is just the general, I think I've mentioned this before, right? So House Bill 2017 and ODOT as an agency really took center stage during the 2017 session. And I think my expectation, and it's been my observation, that this session is a little bit quieter on the transportation policy front, right? So we're dealing with a handful of bills, the TNCs I mentioned, the speed bills I mentioned, but it's not that big, those big issues like for the transportation package. But we've had, I think, the really good fortune and the opportunity to help really educate our legislators and our committee members on the work that we do. The one thing I will note is a couple weeks ago, Director Garrett was in front of the Joint Committee talking about the winter weather response. It was a similar presentation that you all just heard from Mac and Chris. And I think our legislators were really appreciative of being able to observe the work that we do out in the community. It was really great for, I think, me to see the connection that was made from their ability to look at the photos that we were showing them, the work that we're doing on the ground as it related to the slide, that sort of thing, and to be able for them to really make that direct connection to the work that we do, and the fact that our work is so critical to the communities that we serve. So I think they were really appreciative. Chair Bainey, I will specifically note that they were quite appreciative of you coming before them to talk about the staffing and resourcing and wanted me to carry that message to you. So with that, that's all I really have. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Lindsay, could you tell me the bill number on the local government for the TNCs?
Yeah, so Chair Bainey and Commissioner Brown, the bill that is the statewide system is House Bill 3023. I believe, I actually will have to get back to you on the bill number for the local one. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Really appreciate you being on point for this work. You're doing a fabulous job, and engage us if you need us, and keep doing what you're doing.
Will do.
Yes.
Thank you for the update.
Wonderful. Next, we will have an update on House Bill 2017. Ms. Silva, the implementation. And I love that we're just leaving the microphone on. It does, yes. For those that have struggled with it, it's a little fickle.
Yes.
Great to see you this morning.
Good morning, Chair Bainey and Commissioners. So you have in front of you the March 2019 implementation dashboard. As you can see from the implementation highlights, you have several things on your agenda this month that are stemming from the work that's being done related to the House bill. And I think for me, one of the biggest accomplishments that we're bringing forth this month is the 2019 State Infrastructure Condition Report That is one of the conditions tied to the next fuels tax increase. So with any luck, we will get that approved today and submit it to the legislature by April 1st, which is the deadline in the bill, or in the statute, I should say, and be able to kind of check that off the list of things that we need to complete and get accomplished for the next fuels tax increase, which we are tracking very closely and making sure that we are meeting every single condition. There are a couple of those conditions that are up in our technical fix bill this session as well. And then you also hear more on the Connect Oregon sponsor plans and the additional information that they're going to bring forward today. You'll see the State Transportation Improvement Fund transit improvement plans for the formula fund allocation come forward for approval today. And you'll also get your Emerging Technologies Impact Assessment Report, which is a continuation of the work being done related to scenario building for the updates to the OHP and OTP, which is part of our statewide modal plans initiative related to the work in the bill. You'll hear some more information about the tolling system development, and I believe they're coming forward to give you some information and also ask for your feedback as that work continues. And an additional one of the 7 jurisdictional transfers that were in the bill is coming forward for approval today. So quite a bit of things moving along. I'll kind of open it up to questions now from you on anything that's in the report. I will also note for you that there were a couple of things that changed in this specific monthly report. So we extended the timeline and added a kind of check-in milestone for the statewide modal plans to account for the coordination work that's going on now. I think that wasn't necessarily built into the implementation planning and timeline before, although it was always a component of the work, and so we wanted to really account for that and to extend the timeline out to really beef up and build in the scenarios and bring those back to you for input and check-in. You'll also notice there that we have our kind of first yellow mark, and that is really more of an administrative, there's an administrative rationale for that, which is just that the agendas were kind of too full, and as business priorities shifted, we had to kind of bump that report coming to you out to this month. And I think that given that this particular initiative doesn't have any statutory deadlines, we felt okay in doing so. It didn't necessarily impact anything that was going to affect us down the road. And other than that, we also have a change in the the State Transportation Improvement Fund timeline as well, shifting out review and consideration of approval for the discretionary fund applications. Right, so any questions?
This is a tremendous amount of work, and you are doing an incredible job keeping us on point. Is there anything in here, everything appears to be on track?
Yes.
But is there, I know this question I've asked,
Yeah.
anything keeping you up at night that is maybe not reflected here that you want us to be aware of?
No, actually, if there was something keeping me up at night that should be reflected here, it will be reflected here.
Great.
I think, we really are trying to stay on top of everything and making sure that before it would end up on this report in a negative light, that we would take action and make sure that we're, doubling down our diligence to get things in line, on track, in the timeline, and we've been doing a lot of advanced work to ensure that. So that's not without kind of a ton of legwork going into it.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Do commission members have questions or comments? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think I'm staying here for the next item.
Yes, and speaking of the Transportation Infrastructure Condition Request and Report, I will go ahead and, I'm not sure if Mr. Eliason and, do you want folks to join you now? Ms.
Either,
Silva, or-
yes, now would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So gentlemen, if you'd like to come up. We'd asked our representatives from LOC and AOC, our partners in this work. I know that there is a lot of engagement on the ground to make sure that this reporting is put forward, and I first want to say thank you very much for your leadership in having that go forward as seamless as it appears to have gone. And I just would love to also hear how things had, how the process had gone in your perspective as well as capacity and as we go forward together into the future. So Ms. Silva, I turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I will just kind of start with an overview of the process thus far and then open it up to our friends here. So in March last year, you all adopted the conditions, the standard conditions, and then from that point kind of going forward, we worked to develop a process in coordination with our friends at AOC and LSC to really get the word out, to do the outreach, and to develop a reporting process that everyone could, everyone felt comfortable with and felt as though they could comply with as well. And so we did a whole lot of coordination on developing that process, and then also did a whole lot of communication outward. So I just have a quick bit of stats to run through. So we did 2,400 email notifications, 780 letters, hard copy letters out. We answered 300 inquiries via the website, interactive website. We did 50 calls specific to agencies that hadn't maybe reported yet in the January timeframe, to work with them on getting them kind of over that last hump. And there was also an online Q&A that we had 25 attendees come to and or log into and get trained up on the process of reporting and the process for doing the rating system for pavement and bridge conditions. So I think we really wanted to have a really robust strategy for the communications to make sure that everyone met the compliance needs. So we didn't have to have any impact on funding. No.
Sure. Chair Boehne, members of the commission, Michael Eliason with the Association of Oregon Counties. Before I get started, Commissioner Brown, a local government bill on the TNC issue is House Bill 3379. You're welcome. I would just say that we've had a lot of great partnerships with ODOT over the years, both cities and counties. And this was, I think, one of the easiest and best examples of a really good partnership. As soon as the House Bill 2017 passed and it was understood that we're going to have to undertake this process, I know Paul Mather, when he was still, full-time Highway Division Administrator, he quickly, I think, organized a group. We put together a work group that had 3 county road officials, a number of city officials, and myself and a couple other folks. And we really just sat down in a very collaborative way from the get-go. But it was so easy because the straw man proposal that I think Paul had put together along with other ODOT staff was so well thought out and really thread the needle between being informative and what the legislature was asking for, while also being something that 241 cities and 36 counties could implement. And so the straw man he put together, and we had a work group meeting here in the building, was so solid that really our folks had a couple of minor tweaks, but otherwise were completely comfortable with it from the get-go and really felt like they could implement it. And so, we have an advantage at the county level because we have an association, the Oregon Association of County Engineers and Surveyors, which includes all the roadmasters and public works directors and engineers around the state and county government. We have an infrastructure for that. We've got, county road program staff. We've got myself, Susan Morgan, who was on the OTC. We have good, we have a good connection, obviously, with ODOT and with our own county road officials. So we felt pretty confident that we could, based on the proposal that was put together, that we worked on, that again was so well done by ODOT. I felt confident we would get our 36 counties in line and get the reporting done, and we did. But for all 241 cities to be able to accomplish that by the deadline was a great credit to both the process that was put together, the communication from ODOT, and then the work of the cities themselves to get that done. So I feel really good about it, and I know that it's one of the sort of integral parts to making this transportation package work and informing the legislature so they have a baseline on what the condition of the roads are. That was one thing we heard, particularly in Representative, now Senator Bentz's subgroup on the maintenance and preservation angle of the transportation package was how are we going to be able to track what difference the new money makes over time. And so this pavement bridge condition reporting is an important part of that. So again, kudos to ODOT staff in particular, but also to the city and county staff who got out there and actually did the reporting.
Jim McCauley, Commissioner, League of Oregon Cities. So Mike kind of ran through a little bit of the, I'll say before Jim came on board with the LOC. So I've been with the organization since December of 18. So I wasn't part of the communication and the work with ODOT during that time frame, but I know our members and my former person I filled, took the position from, Craig Honeyman, appreciated the work that ODOT staff was involved with, creating at least a pretty transparent process. So when I came on board in December, deadline was looming, and we had, I think, multiple communications, certainly with staff at ODOT during that time frame, to make sure that we got all 241 of the cities to report on time. I think we probably ended up doing some weekly bulletins. We have a pretty good, pretty robust communication system that we have a weekly bulletin that goes out to all of our cities. That includes a manager group and folks that are part of this system. And I think about the only confusing part on any of this for them, and this had virtually nothing to do with the ODOT communications that was going out, was that there are multiple transportation reports that do go out, and there are population thresholds. So some of the smaller cities, specifically those under 5,000, didn't think that they actually had to do this at some point. But again, through our communication, through the additional work that ODOT was doing, through a memo that we actually put together and sent out to folks, we were able to get everybody across the threshold. And I think for us going forward with this, we're going to develop some kind of a template for all of our cities to be able to follow, so that they know what year, what report, the timelines, and who qualifies for it and stuff. But again, this all came together through a combination of work between certainly our communication effort and with ODOT, and I appreciate it.
So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you all may have related to the content of the report.
Okay. Do we have questions, please?
So when I was looking through this, you know, these are summarized data points, but when you break it down and look at some of the smaller cities or counties and whatnot, they actually have higher levels of either pavement or bridges that are in poor conditions. Is there like a plan or goal or strategy in how we work aside them to get them up to par? I mean, there clearly are a lot that aren't in poor condition at all, but still, what about those ones that are in excess of, you know, 50%?
Sorry, Commissioner Simpson and commissioners, I think the ultimate goal of having this reporting is to highlight some of those things so that we can make a plan going forward for those cities and counties that do have that kind of disproportionate number of reported poor condition, you know, road pavement miles or bridges in their jurisdiction. Prior to this, I'm not sure that we necessarily focused in on those data points specifically, but I'm not the subject matter expert on that, and so I can definitely get a more precise answer for you on that piece.
Sure. And Commissioner Simpson, this back.
Punch it.
There we go. Commissioner Simpson, that's a good question, and I would just say that when I look at this and the breakdown on the county side, it really speaks to the reason, and I think this kind of goes along with the city's perspective as well, as part of House Bill 2017, on the county side, all of the counties came together and talked about how we could redistribute a small percentage of the new money, or what would be a small percentage to certainly some of the bigger counties. I mean, Jim was out Washington County and was intimately involved in this previously, but how we could come up with a new formula to get additional money to some of the very rural counties that have large numbers of road miles, but didn't fare well under the highway, the formula essentially, and so because they don't have many registered vehicles. So when I look at this, some of the counties that have the highest proportion of poor condition road miles, counties like Grant and Malheur and Union, those are counties that under the new House Bill 2017 not only got an increase from just the standard increase in formula, but also the essentially the kindness and generosity of the 7 biggest counties or so to be able to redistribute a portion of money, additional money out to them. So the goal would be those counties would have additional funds and be able to start addressing that high proportion of poor condition road miles.
Great.
I think it also brings about the point that while historic level of funding in House Bill 2017, the system as a whole was sorely behind in terms of the preservation and maintaining the current system. And so this really is that recognition that we had a long way to go just to get our system up to where we could actually be enhancing. So I think this tells a story that had been mentioned, but maybe not captured in a real way, that we can now use that going forward for additional funding when the time comes for that to be necessary. But I think that commitment that happened with the counties was certainly a recognition of that we have a statewide system and that we don't have just city by city or county by county. We have a state as a whole. So I think that that partnership really is an undercurrent, which is unique to Oregon, I think, in terms of our ability to address each other's needs together. And I am very appreciative of that. Commissioner Brown.
I echo a lot of your comments, Chair Boehne. I just wanted to thank all of you because I know that this was a lot of work. I was part of conversations with cities where they were really concerned that they would be able to produce the report. They didn't know what they were looking at, what the responsibilities were. And of course, there's always that worry of overreach to the local level. But with this said, this is something I've been looking for years, sitting on our act and talking over the conversation in our communities is, we've never really had a really good report that shows us what we need to do, and it gives us the opportunity to prioritize and concentrate on what needs to happen. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done, not only ODOT but also for the cities and counties, because I think this is the first piece, and I agree with you. If you don't have the story to tell to the legislators, you're never going to receive more money. So thank you.
Yeah, no. I want to add just one comment and stuff on this too for me. So, my history on this certainly started working for Washington County and things of that nature, and all the years leading up to 2017. And I think that was a constant theme, was trying to demonstrate the physical need out there. It's fairly obvious, I think, within the interstate system and things of that nature. It's less obvious within those local streets, which is where I think this condition reporting is going to be helpful, at least establishing that baseline. And everybody realizes that, but I think for any of us that are here 7 or 10 years in the future, doing another transportation bill or something like it, we at least will have a baseline now. We'll be able to try to measure some of that success, and we'll be able to at least use that information so that we're a little bit more eyes wide open for the next transportation plan and know where some of that funding will need to take place that's out there.
I appreciate the fact that this provides additional funding for cities and counties, but one of the things that concerns me is when you look at the smaller counties and many of the smaller cities, do they have the technical expertise on staff or the budget to attain additional outside staff to help with these projects?
That would be, I think, a case by case almost, and I think the answer is no, especially for those smaller cities. Now, there's consulting services, there's the work within ODOT and things of that nature that I think they're all going to benefit from, or they can collectively benefit from. But that is still a piece, especially among the smaller communities, that they are still lacking and have to depend on the state or potentially some other type of funding source to try to look at for some of those improvements, just the technical piece of the planning. Now, there actually is some legislation this year trying to add some additional funding within the economic development districts that actually would have an application out there specifically for those communities less than 2,500. And it's not just a road infrastructure type of focus. It covers schools, it covers other elements and things of that nature related to grant writing and things of that nature, because there are literally billions of dollars left on the table every year that some of these communities could qualify for, but flat out don't have the resources to simply put together a grant, let alone go through the implementation process. So I think you're going to see some continual enhancements in those types of infrastructure needs, those basic infrastructure needs, is just trying to figure out the planning, the technical stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve the infrastructure condition report. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
I think it's Bob over here transmitting through the matrix.
Okay, so let's go ahead. Sorry, I didn't catch that. So all those in favor? And then worried it's going to.
Aye.
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 Wonderful.
Forgot
Motion
Bob.
carries. Good to see you both. Thank you, Ms. Silva, as well, and thank you for the leadership in getting us to where we are today. Next, again, another component of House Bill 2017, an exciting day for us to get to this point. We have the recommendation on the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, the STIF funds, and a lot of work has gone into this. And Mr. Guard, I'll turn it over to you this morning. Good to see you both.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission.
Okay, go to the mic. Am I on? Oh, I thought I was off. Sorry. No.
I'm a little nervous now.
You got it.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, my name's Hal Guard. I'm the administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Joining me today is Mr. Jeff Hazen, who is the current chair of our your Public Transit Advisory Committee. And I'm going to hear eyeballs clack in the back of the room, but I'm going to go a little bit off script just because I can. In my career, I've gotten to work on 3 major programs that really affected the lives of many, many people in this state, or significantly changed the way this agency did its business. This program is the cherry on top. I don't even think we can truly appreciate the long-term effects of this funding program across the state right now. Jeff is going to spend a little bit of time highlighting what we think we know, but I still can't even envision 10 years out what the state is going to look like. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to do this. This is a big deal. It's a big deal. So with that, I think we're going to get started. So we're here today really to cover these areas. We're going to talk about the current funding that we believe is available based upon our best efforts. We're going to walk through and just kind of highlight the decision-making process that we went through to arrive at the recommendation that we'll be presenting to the commission. As I mentioned, Jeff is going to spend a little time talking about the anticipated outcomes from the formula funding plan, talk a little bit around some details of the Public Transportation Advisory Committee plan recommendations, and then what our next steps are going to be. Couple things that I want to highlight up front. This is just a process piece in terms of timing. We went through our Public Transit Advisory subgroup to work through the plans that were submitted. There was a recommendation made to the full advisory committee to reject 2 line item elements within those plans because they did not meet the criteria outlined in rule. We took those findings, we submitted those to the qualified entities to give them a chance to rework it. We received changes back, which, based upon staff review, met all the criteria laid out in rule. However, those staff recommendations did not go back through the Public Transportation Advisory Committee process, but we feel confident that they meet the intent. So we're going to present those as part of the overall recommendation, but I just wanted to highlight that little strange hop. Okay. So based upon the December 2018 estimate, we believe there is approximately $201.9 million that will be available for this particular funding round in total. That includes funding from the third and fourth quarters of 2019, all of 2020, and all of 2021. And this is up from the April 2019 estimate or from the 2018 estimate that we originally provided the Commission, which was $194.5 million. So a little better return than we thought. The discretionary fund, which will be coming later, is now estimated to be about $11.2 million, and then the intercommunity discretionary fund, again, those grants will be coming for the Commission later, at $9 million. After 1 quarter of actual revenue collected, the forecast has really proved accurate. We're seeing a compliance rate of 75%, and we have right now $19.2 million in actual revenue collected so far. Collection costs from the Department of Revenue, they've been lower than expected, but there's still a fair degree of uncertainty in the overall cost of getting the program up and running and on the ground, so we continue to monitor that as we work forward. We are expecting compliance to increase about 3% per year and really peaking at about a 90% compliance rate overall. So pretty good return on the investment. Quick reminder, this is the formula fund decision-making process that we stepped through for the overall program. The qualified entities, advisory committees, they review and provide advice to the governing body of those individual qualified entities. That qualified entity governing body approves the final STIF plan. Our staff goes through and does a completeness, consistency, and compliance review. That body, that product, is then was turned over to the PTAC STIF plan subcommittee to really dig into the details and work through the elements. Their final recommendation was sent to the full PTAC body for review, and a final recommendation to the OTC, which brings us here today. We had 18 of 42 qualified entities submit plans for a total of $161 million. That leveraged an additional $39 million in local and federal funds all the way around, bringing the total project up to $201 million. We asked QEs, just because we've been uncertain about the overall flow, to develop plans that had a 30% buffer in them, so if there is more money available, we're not revisiting the process, we can just go down the list and allocate additional funds. Of the 18 QEs, just kind of a quick breakdown in terms of allotments around 4 main budget categories. There's $80 million in operations, or about 50% of the money, so new services. $76 million in capital improvements, or another 47%. Planning, overall, we're looking at 2% at $3 million, and then administration of 1% at about $2 million, which is pretty good return on administrative fees. We have another 24 qualified entities that are anticipated to submit plans the 1st of May, and we would be back here in the late summer, early fall for OTC approval of those plans. The remaining anticipated request coming in to us is between $50.5 million to $65.7 million in project plans. And with that, I am going to hand the good stuff over to Mr. Hazen.
Again, for the record, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so that we don't have the,
Yeah.
yep, we'll try.
Okay. Good to be back. Just for the record, Jeff Hazen, Sunset Empire Transportation District up in Clatsop County. I'm the executive director, and as Hal mentioned, the chair of PTAC this year, or currently. And I appreciate the opportunity that staff gave me to highlight the fun stuff, because this is not only fun, it's impactful. I'll share a little brief story a little bit later on the impacts that we're having with the new funding source. So here's some of the projected outcomes. Currently, Oregonians across the state, we provide 131 million rides. And so with the first round, we're going to be adding 83 million rides through this cycle, per year, amongst these 18 agencies. So that's spectacular to me. Revenue hours are going to be 852,000. Revenue miles, 33 million. This is an exciting one. We'll be talking a lot about low-income households. The number of low-income households located within a quarter mile of a transit stop, 1 million households. That's not just 1 million people, that's 1 million households. And then also, we always talk about connectivity and the number of new stops shared with other providers. We'll be adding 170 on top of the 261 that we currently have now. So tremendous increase in that to make it easier for Oregonians and visitors to transfer from one provider to the next. We're adding reduced fare programs, expanding hours of service to schools, adding more dial-a-ride service for students in highly rural areas, or such as what I'm going to be doing, and I'm not part of this first round of applications. We're going to be starting shuttle service to a couple of very rural communities within our county that have been identified as they need help during the summer with students that want to participate in the internship program that's going on within the county. And so that's going to be absolutely dynamite for us. And the student thing is very exciting to be a part of, because all school districts across the state are focused on chronic absenteeism, and transportation's been identified as a barrier. So we're very happy that we're going to be providing 104,000 rides to these students to help them out. Capital investments. In the plan submitted, 162 new vehicles are going to be purchased. 51 vehicles, or 31%, are replacement vehicles, and 101 of them are going to be for expansion for new service. Of the 162 vehicles, 112 are fueled by gas or diesel, and the remaining 50 by low or no emission propulsion methods, including 8 by CNG, 34 electric, and then 8 by other alternative fuels. The other exciting thing is the other capital investment. 14 facilities are going to be constructed, expanded, or renovated. And then over 1,400 units of other equipment, such as ADP hardware, software, bicycle equipment, bus passenger shelters, which our riders really appreciate on the coast, bus route signing, bus surveillance security system or equipment and systems, bus charging infrastructure, and fueling infrastructure, because we need those for the deployment of the new vehicles. Statute requires us to specify how much of the funding is spent to benefit the 7 key program criteria. The dollar values could exceed 100% because some projects can have multiple benefits, and we're seeing that in everybody's applications. The first 3 columns on the screen are all geared to low income. And there's some big numbers there. $47 million to be expended on increasing frequency of service to areas with high percentage of low-income households. Almost $33 million to expand routes and services to areas with high percentage of low-income households. And $17 million to reduce fares in communities with high income. And I want to go off this just a little bit on the low-income part. Yesterday, my agency's advisory committee met to prioritize our projects for our application in the second round. And when we were done, we gavelled down. One of our committee members who represents she's from the Lower Columbia Hispanic Council. She started bawling because she recognized the impact that this is going to have on not just the low income, the Hispanics in our community, but the entire community. And so she cried, everybody else applauded. It was one of the highlights of my adult career yesterday. I woke up at 1:30 as I usually do every night, thinking about, you asked the question, what keeps you up at night? Yesterday I woke up and I felt like it was the first day of school as a kid. I was very excited about it. So it was a great day yesterday. Anyway, back on track. $41 million to buy low or no emission buses in areas with populations over 200,000. $11 million to improve frequency and reliability of service between communities inside and outside of the service areas. $5 million to improve coordination between transit providers to reduce fragmentation of service, and then $15 million to provide service for students in grade 9 through 12. The approval considerations that we went through were consistent with House Bill 2017 as amended, and Oregon administrative rules, and then the OTC approved rejection considerations. So there's two major parts to our recommendation. The first is a rule interpretation that was put forth by ODOT staff, and that is to recommend that the OTC accepts rail and public transportation districts' rural interpretation that replacing a transit vehicle that has reached its useful life would improve rather than maintain a service for the following reasons. Replacing vehicles that have reached their useful life improves fleet condition and reliability. It reduces maintenance costs and fuel expenses and provides fleet backup and flexibility. It also reduces out-of-service hours for assets and provides a safer and improved passenger experience. So that's one major thing that we're asking for today, is your approval of that interpretation. And then the next one is the big one, the actual plans. We're asking you as a whole to approve these 16 plans that were presented. We also would recommend that you approve TriMet STIF plan, except Project 4, which would have expended up to 50% of the $1.7 million to maintain projects if state SDF funding was reduced for the next biennium. We also recommended approval of Curry County's STIF plan, except Project 10, which would have expended 30% of their $36,000 budget to maintain existing ongoing administrative expenses. And as Hal mentioned, both QEs have submitted revised STIF plans to address those issues, and he'll speak to those.
Okay, so I just want to dig into this a little bit so you know what the criteria was and how the remedy went forward. At the time the materials were due for the meeting, staff received and evaluated a revised STIF plan from Curry County, and we determined that they addressed the rejection consideration identified by PTAC, and they're now proposing to use the new funding on new service rather than to maintain administrative expenses currently paid by the county. So that was that supplanting issue that we've all had quite a bit of discussion around. So they've resolved that.
So before we move on to TriMet, so with that, it signaled a little bit of, do they have the capacity to be able to go forward with the existing funding? So any concerns there that the funding that they had previously was enough to begin with, and that for them, with the added funding coming in, that they'll be able to navigate through that?
Yeah, Chair Bainey, I appreciate that. We feel comfortable with the course they've outlined. Now, we do have our regional transit coordinators who are embedded in the field, and they work extremely closely with all of the service providers and qualified entities. So we will make sure across the board that Curry County is positioned for success, and that means everything from fiduciary oversight to operational capacity and however else we can assist. So it's not lost on anybody how important this program is and how initial successes are, and we will move heaven and earth. Absolutely. The next area, staff also received and evaluated a revised STIF plan from TriMet. We determined that they have addressed the rejection consideration identified by PTAC, and they are now proposing to use all the funds to improve or expand service with new transit services to seniors and people with disabilities in the Tri-County area rather than maintaining existing transit services for seniors and people with disabilities. And this was a situation where TriMet was anticipating or actually saw the governor's recommended budget with that $10 million reduction in STF plans, and so they tried to backfill that with their STF, and it really didn't pass the intent of the legislation or the rules as developed. So they have reversed that decision and submitted a revised plan. So with that, quick recap of where we are today. So we have a requested action in front of OTC, and thank you for being willing to advance that request to accept or reject the 18 applications and the plans for the formula funds, and we would be seeing first disbursements of funding going out in early May upon a positive recommendation from this body. We are on track to continue to implement the program on schedule overall. The STIF discretionary and intercommunity grant applications, they were due on the 1st of February. We received 64 applications, and as I mentioned earlier, that totaled $19.5 million in funding. So May 1st, we'll receive the second batch of STIF plans for formula funds, and we'll be back in front of the commission to provide information about those projects awarded through our federal formula programs as we set up last year in terms of how those funding cycles go. If you remember last fall or last spring, you approved, or I guess it was summer, you approved the formulas for those programs. And then this summer, we expect to be before you to ask you to award the STIF discretionary and intercommunity grant awards. And then in September, we'll be back for the second batch of formula funds. And then we are on track to report out to the legislature February 1st, 2020 on the results of this program overall. So with that.
So questions or comments? Please, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Of course, I'm going to comment. I'm not going to start crying, Jeff, even though I feel like it. This is a long time coming, and I agree with you, Hal. I remember a conversation. It was be bold or go home. When we were considering funding for transit, it was a really tough one because we had been in a deficit for so many years that we couldn't even vision what it could look like. And today, laying out all of this information, all these plans, really hits home hard for me to see that the future transit is moving forward in the state of Oregon, which it needed to do for years and years. So thank you to all of you for the hard work. I do want to tell the rest of the commission I attended the PTAC committee meeting when they were reviewing the recommendations from the advisory committee, and it was a robust discussion. It was a difficult discussion for them. The supplanting issue came up not only for Curry County but for TriMet. I'm glad to hear that those were resolved and that all 18 projects could move forward together. So I just wanted to let you know that there was a lot of conversation around this, and I know that the staff worked hard to resolve it, so thank you.
Well, I had the opportunity to attend a couple of meetings down in Southwest Oregon, and I can tell you that both Coos and Curry counties are very enthused that they're going to be able to add capacity, add service, and they very much appreciate that. I think I went to the SWAC meeting just recently, but I went to a previous SWAC meeting, I believe in January, and I was asked about the $10 million in the governor's budget, and I advised everybody to write to their legislator immediately, and I guess that has helped some. So thank you for your hard work, and I think this is a step forward. I know down in our area, Southwestern Oregon Community College, has had to delay programs because there were students in outlying communities that couldn't get there. So they've revised their schedules. Now that they've got Coos County Transit on hopefully a new schedule soon, that more students from the outlying communities can make it to the college campus in Coos Bay. So thanks a lot.
So I, too, would like to say thank you to PTAC for the commitment of time, to Hal and to your team for the just connection to community and walking through this new process, and for taking a leadership role there as well. I also want to call out Commissioner Brown. Your work prior to coming on to the Transportation Commission really helped to get us to where we are in terms of investment and funding and the recognition of what this means to communities and individuals that we serve. I think it is an exciting time for us to be putting this into play, and I think we're, it's life-changing, and for individuals that, we talk a lot about getting people off the system, but there are many that need this system to work well. They don't have a choice, and so it is life-changing for them. I believe we have two things in front of us. One is, first of all, the interpretation of the bus replacement, and then the second is would be the projects themselves, whether in block or separate. And so I want to turn to Commissioner Van Brocklin. Do you have anything that you would like to put on the record?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to echo the comments that have already been made, and thank Mr. Gorge and his team and all of those that were responsible for creating the STIP. I think it's one of the best things that came out of our after the increasing mobility, equity, accessibility, improving air quality, and a myriad of other values, positive values. This is a very special and unique improvement in the state in terms of its transportation funding system and support across the state for mass transit. So I think it's just exceptional program, and I would like to do nothing more today than to vote for it, but I'm a lawyer at Stoll Reeves, and we as a firm represent TriMet and also at least one of the county recipients, so I am going to recuse myself from I think those representations create a potential conflict of interest, and therefore I'm going to recuse myself from deliberating or voting on this, but that does not diminish my admiration for everyone that's been involved in putting this in place, from the governor and the legislature through to the department and all of the local entities. And I agree with the chair. Commissioner Brown's work on this has been exceptionally important. So thank you for all the good work. I wish I could vote for this, but I'm complying with ethics laws and sitting this one out.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Van Brocklin. Any other comments or considerations? So I would welcome a motion on, first, the interpretation, if that is something that we support in terms of bus replacement.
I move for approval of the interpretation for whatever.
Okay.
For the bus replacement.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone abstaining?
I think I can vote on this element, so I will vote yes.
Okay, and you are getting the nod from Bonnie in the back of the room. So, okay. If Bonnie agrees, we're all happy. So next, is it the will of the commission to move forward with a block of 18, or would you prefer to take them outside of that? Block? Okay, great. Just wanted to leave that. And so I would welcome a motion for the projects in block.
Madam Chair, I move to approve plans for formula funding received for the 18 of the 42 qualified entities as a block.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Van Broeklen, would you like to put on the record your recusal?
Yes, I recuse myself from this vote and abstain.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Chair Boehne, can I beg your indulgence for a second?
Please, absolutely.
There is somebody in the back of the room who was the driving force on this, Ms. Karen Criswell, and I would just like to publicly acknowledge her incredible work. She moved heaven and earth in no time at all. Karen, thank you.
Well, and what you have set up is something that we will be using into the future, and so your fingerprints are on this for many years to come. And so as we go forward in changing lives, I hope that you know that you are at the tip of the spear, as the director would say, in terms of getting that done. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and
Please.
and as a urban kid who's grown up around transit options, I mean, to me it was standard. So coming aboard the commission and being able to see the needs and the ability to have access to transit options in rural communities, and just the importance of that is actually, to me, it just seems practical. So I'm glad that we're moving forward in this direction and shifting the way in which we think about transportation in the other parts of the state outside of the urban community.
Thank you for recognizing there's another part of the state. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the leadership. I did. There was my zinger. Wonderful. All right, so next we have a presentation, and Mr. Guard, I know you'll be continuing to stay with us, on the update of the Oregon State Rail Plan and development of the Oregon Highway Railroad Crossing Safety Action Plan. So, Mr. Guard, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Boehne, members of the Commission. Again, Hal Guard. I'm the Administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Joining me today, I kind of think this is the first time both of these individuals have been in front of the Commission, so be gentle. I have Roseanne O'Loughlin from Transportation Development Division, who's been helping us do the rail plan update, and I have Mr. Rick Schenkel, who is the manager of our rail crossing program. That program he runs beautifully. We hear very little bit about it until all of a sudden it's a mess and everybody gets to hear about it. It's just the nature of rail crossing. So really, we're not asking for action from the Commission today. We are really just coming before you because anytime we have to redo a rail plan, that requires a level of public hearing. So we want to make sure our Commission knows that work is going on. Under the FAST Act, there were new requirements that our state modal plan, or at least for FRA, our modal plans need to be updated every 4 years. And so it feels like we were just here in front of you getting approval on our state rail plan, but now we're back for the update. And there's another element that is now part of those FAST Act's requirements, which is the development of a highway railroad crossing safety action plan. And so that is a new element to our portfolio. And again, Roseanne has been really the point of the spear, along with Rick and his team, developing that new program. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Ms. O'Loughlin and let these two carry it away.
Thank you, Hal. For the record, my name is Roseanne O'Loughlin. I'm a principal planner in the Transportation Development Division at ODOT. First, we will start with an overview of the State Rail Plan. As Hal explained, the State Rail Plan is a federally mandated plan in Oregon. The State Rail Plan is also our supporting modal policy plan for our transportation plan. It guides investment decisions for the state rail system with refined policies, rail-specific system information, and implementation priorities to address rail system needs to meet Oregon's transportation vision. The plan was last developed and updated by the OTC in September 2014. The FAST Act requires a 4-year update, which was recently changed from a 5-year update. The plan is intended to meet the requirements under the FAST Act, which furthered the requirements from its predecessor, the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008, or PRIA. This plan will be updated in compliance with the final state rail plan guidance as specified by the Federal Railroad Administration. Our 2014 plan actually met each of these requirements. Therefore, this update will focus on updating items for which we have better information available. For example, We will be updating a number of data tables and maps, such as ridership totals, commodity flow information, and track mileage. We are revising our trends and economic forecasts with the most recent information available, working closely with our state economists for current and forecasted numbers. Finally, ODOT is updating the freight and passenger needs list. We are thinking beyond the needs articulated in the 2014 plan to ensure the needs list reflects the current and future rail needs for Oregon. And again, we will not be revising the vision, goals, or policies of the plan. Rather, we are completing an update light. Given the technical nature of the plan, ODOT is incorporating stakeholder input throughout the process. But rather than establish a standalone stakeholder committee, we are utilizing our standing state rail advisory committee. This group is made up of representatives from railroads, Amtrak, ODOT staff, and the private sector. This committee is involved extensively in the process, including development of the needs list. We will also be working with our Public Transportation Advisory Committee and the Oregon Freight Advisory Committee. Additionally, we are working in coordination with our neighbors to the north at Washington State Department of Transportation on the plan efforts, ensuring that we share timely information. ODOT began this update process in early 2018, and we are expected to complete later this year in 2019, accommodating the passenger rail DEIS and record of decision. At that time, we anticipate bringing this updated plan back to you as a commission and opening for public comment period. So switching gears a bit, I'm going to actually hand it over to Rick Schenkel to provide some background on rail crossing safety efforts at ODOT.
For the record, my name is Richard Schenkel. I manage the Crossing Safety Unit within the Rail and Public Transit Division of ODOT. With 5 full-time staff dedicated to crossing safety, and that's 1 inspector and 4 project managers, ODOT regulates 1,868 public at-grade crossings, 508 public grade-separated crossings. 49 of the at-grade crossings are pedestrian only. We work cooperatively on about 40 crossing projects a year, and through that, ODOT relies on strong partnerships for these projects to be successful. Each project has a minimum of 3 project partners, and they are the Road Authority, the Railroad, and ODOT Rail and Public Transit Division. Annually, ODOT receives $3 million in federal FHWA Section 130 funds, and these are used for crossing safety. At least 50% of these funds have to be used for warning devices at crossings. Any remaining funds can be used for hazard mitigation. These federal funds require a non-federal match of at least 10%. In addition to the Section 130 funds, ODOT receives $300,000 annually from the State Grade Crossing Protection Account. Together, these funding sources fund only about 4 crossing safety projects a year. The other projects are requested and funded by the local road authority, and they really aren't crossing safety projects, but they are required crossing alteration projects brought about by upgrades to the community's road systems. There are many components at crossings, making them some of the most complex intersections on the transportation system. In Oregon, there are about 1,900 at-grade crossings, and just under half of them have active warning devices. And that means these crossings have flashing lights, gates, and bells that are activated by an approaching train. Of these, 150 of those are interconnected with adjacent highway traffic signals. We regulate all manner of traffic control devices, which include signage, and we also ensure that other elements such as guardrails meet state and federal requirements. We have authority over all types of public crossings and work cooperatively with the partners on several types of projects, including multimodal crossings, which would include multi-use paths and sidewalks. Our regulatory authority extends out from the railroad to the safe stopping distance, which is calculated based on the roadway speed. That authority includes travel lanes, which would be vehicle lanes, bike lanes, sidewalks, and even the direction of travel. Pavement markings are also an example of a traffic control device that we regulate and inspect for. While we don't fund projects to replace crossing surfaces, we do regulate and inspect the crossings to ensure that the appropriate parties are maintaining the crossing surfaces in a reasonably smooth condition. With the current staff, our main focus has been on engineering solutions. The unit does not typically engage in public outreach and has no authority to enforce traffic laws at crossings. Despite not currently being involved in these type of activities, we do recognize the need and the importance of these activities in improving crossing safety. Now that I've provided some background on what ODOT currently crossing safety program does, I'd like to turn this back over to Roseanne to discuss the State Highway Railroad Crossing Safety Action Plan.
Thank you, Rick. As Hal explained, the Highway Railroad Crossing Safety Action Plan is also federally mandated by the FAST Act. In fact, all states are required to complete it. And as in many states, this is the first of its kind for Oregon. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of what the plan does, what the specific requirements are, and how we developed this plan. The Crossing Action Plan provides a comprehensive approach to crossing safety, going beyond the traditional approach to rail crossing safety, which emphasizes engineering, because in reality, these intersections can only be engineered so much. Safety relies on good traveler judgment, responsible behavior, and an understanding of crossing safety risks. Our plan includes 31 strategies and 85 related actions, which I'll describe in more detail shortly. Being a rail crossing safety action plan, naturally, this plan is an implementation element of the state rail plan, supporting the vision of a safe and efficient rail system. But it also has a direct nexus with our transportation safety action plan, which includes emphasis areas to achieve the vision of zero fatalities or life-changing injuries on the transportation system by 2035. Additionally, this plan supports ODOT's progress towards key performance measures, or KPMs, in this case measuring annual crossing incidents, where a target is currently set for 10. So Oregon intends to meet its federal guidelines and obligations for this plan, but it was important from the beginning for ODOT to develop a plan that suited Oregon's needs and helps us meet our transportation safety vision. ODOT's compliance maintains our eligibility for federal Section 130 dollars, but also for future grant opportunities. The FRA is the agency responsible for maintaining compliance of the plans with the FAST Act. As such, the FRA issued State Action Plan guidance, which outlined a series of requirements, including the need to identify specific solutions for rail crossing safety, the need to address multiple incident locations, and the need to cover a 5-year period. To maintain our compliance, we will work closely with our FRA partners and submit for their approval. ODOT began this plan development process in early 2018 through a partnership between the Rail and Public Transit Division and Transportation Development Division. We've worked through 2018 and have completed the draft plan. We are currently finalizing the report and will send for review this spring. Shortly after completion, we will submit the plan for FRA comments and approval. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about the plan development process. We began with a robust data analysis, looking at incidents for the most recent 10 years available, in our case 2008 to 2017. We reviewed only incidents on the public at-grade system crossings, excluding suicides and trespassing. We also excluded TriMet incidents since Section 130 dollars cannot be used for transit crossings. We assessed incidents for a range of contributing factors, which I'll discuss shortly. Next, we looked into crossing safety best practices from other states and cities, getting a sense of how other DOTs approach crossing safety, kind of what worked and what didn't. From there, we assessed current trends and factors that impact transportation safety as well as crossing safety. We found trends such as distracted driving, impatience, and impairment to be relevant trends that may impact crossing safety. And we incorporated stakeholder input throughout the process. We synthesized this information into the aforementioned 31 strategies and related actions. So I want to give you just some highlights of the extensive data analysis that we completed as part of this project. As I mentioned, we assessed incidents for the 10 years available, most recent available, which was 2008 to 2017. We found that incidents declined significantly in the years following the Great Recession, so specifically 2012 and 2013, which also followed decades of an extended decline in incidents. However, the trend line has risen in recent years, with incidents rising again for all modes of travel. This is in line with national trends. This chart shows a breakdown of incidents by the mode that was involved, with vehicles accounting for the majority of incidents. The arrows call your attention to vehicles at the top and pedestrians at the bottom, and we are especially concerned about the rise in pedestrian incidents. So we assessed 120 incidents in this period, and we found that there were 81 locations with one incident and 19 locations with more than one incident. These 120 incidents accounted for 20 fatalities and 29 major injuries. The data analysis included an assessment of a number of factors in the incidents. For example, the first of which we looked at is who was involved in the incident. We assessed for gender and age and found that male travelers overwhelmingly make up the majority of those involved in incidents. And actually, more specifically, the younger the traveler, the higher the involvement. Commercial driver's license, or CDL drivers, were involved in 18 of the 120 incidents, which is a number that stood out to us. We looked at where incidents occurred. We found that the North and Mid-Willamette Valley has the highest number of incidents, and this is intuitive since this is where the bulk of Oregon's population is, where we have the highest number of crossings, and actually where we see the most train activity. When looking at the time of incidents, we found that incidents tended to occur most often during the early lunch period or early PM peak hours during the work week, with Friday being the most common time for incidents. Additionally, when we looked at incidents, we found that most incidents occurred during the winter months, with summer closely following. This is not surprising since this is during the darkest hours and actually also when we see the highest traffic volumes as well. These numbers are actually right in line with national trends as well. So an important assessment factor is traveler behavior at the time of incident. Specifically, we found that nearly 90% of incidents involved incidents where a traveler went around the gates, stopped and proceeded, or got stuck or stalled on the tracks, indicating that traveler judgment is a major contributing factor. And finally, we looked at crossing characteristics, such as warning devices in place, the intersection angle, obstructions, train speed, and so forth. And we found that 55% of the incidents occurred at crossings with active devices in place. So this is an example of a map that we developed for the plan. The dark lines are the railroads, and the circles represent incident clusters. I want to show you this map to just give you a visual of where we're seeing incidents. And as I mentioned, the Willamette Valley represents the majority of incidents. However, although 70% of our incidents occur in our urban locations, our rural locations were clustered in a series of specific areas, notably in eastern Oregon, and more specifically in the Umatilla County area. I explained that stakeholder input was an important component of the plan process, and I just want to provide a little bit more information. It was important to establish a standalone committee of crossing safety experts for this plan process. The group comprised of railroad, local agency, ODOT, federal partner, Association of Oregon Counties, and Operation Lifesaver representatives was convened for 2 intense work sessions. The group discussed and debated incident contributing factors, plan strategies, objectives, and funding prioritization criteria. Additionally, we presented the plan and sought input from our standing statewide rail advisory committee, and we actually reached out to numerous ODOT divisions and units for information and input. We worked closely with our Transportation Safety Division, DMV, Active Transportation, Research, and Highway, just to name a few examples. We found that the plan efforts resonated across units throughout the agency, and many connections were made. To synthesize the incident analysis, trends, research, and stakeholder input, we developed 31 strategies and 85 actions that work to achieve 8 objectives. The strategies and actions fall into 2 categories: modifying traveling behavior, meaning improving traveler judgment and reducing risky behavior, and improving coordination and collaboration from ODOT, meaning improving our own information sharing, our project processes, and our funding prioritization processes. So more specifically, within these 2 categories are a series of focus areas that you see on the screen. The focus areas collectively form the strategy framework of the plan. Each focus area is connected to the others, but is distinguished by unique contributions to improving crossing safety in Oregon. So we're in the final draft stages now, and as we explained, there's no action required by the Commission. But we did want to give you a high-level sense and overview to provide some idea of the work we're doing for rail crossing safety in Oregon. Thank you for the time and interest in the Highway Railroad Crossing Safety Action Plan. Rick and I can answer any questions you have at this time.
Well, I'll point out the obvious of 1 inspector and 1,868 public crossings, a team of 4 planners. That's awful lean. So as we go forward, what type of a prioritization do we use for getting out on the inspections? Is if we were to take, my understanding, if I heard you correctly, we had 40 a year of projects, maybe that doesn't equate to inspections. A little bit of the crosswalk there of how that works, because it would be nearly my lifetime before we'd get back to the first one that we started with. So if we're only doing 40 a year. So a little bit of backcast on what that looks like, please.
Thank you, Chair Beatty. We have, the 1 inspector covers the whole, well, all of these people cover the whole state. They're all based here in Salem. My 1 inspector can typically cover every one of the crossings in about an 18-month period. The 40 crossing projects, again, are 4 that we are able to select a year, then plus the other approximately 36 that the local road authorities request as well. My inspector also goes out and inspects these crossings once they're completed to verify that they meet all the requirements that we set forth.
That's very helpful. I was misunderstanding how all that worked together, and I was just figuring we were maybe missing something, so thank you very much. Please, Commissioner.
Having some background with rail, I appreciate the work that your people do, but I'm more interested in how do you propose better enforcement, because that's where I see a gap.
Somebody answer.
Chair Boehne, Commissioner Gallery, we haven't gotten to the point where we're going to figure out how enforcement. We know it is a critical component of this. I did sit in here a few months ago when key performance measures were brought forward, and I happened to be in this room with you when the Oregon State Police were talking about how they're shorthanded. And from my perspective, it is a matter of getting more police officers out there to enforce any laws that we have.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, one area that I'm particularly concerned about, and I realize this crossing action plan didn't really work on the trespasser piece and some other areas, but the education part just stands out to me as an area where we need to put an awful lot more attention. And I get the impression, just kind of looking at the data and the daily reports I get from FRA, that we kind of know the demographic, we know where the issues are. There's a change in behaviors that we're seeing from folks, and I think we need a better targeted outreach. Operation Lifesaver traditionally has focused on educating the children, be aware of trains, but I think we need to be educating our young adults. I think we need to be focusing on our homeless population, who tends to use those rail lines as pathways, between communities. And we just see it just tremendous carnage from trains, and it just boggles my mind that you can get hit by a train, but it happens every day. So Rick and I have been having just kind of side conversations about how do we step up that education component and see if we can approach this not just from an engineering standpoint, but from that knowledge and awareness component as well.
Are there new updated regulatory federal standards around design standards that are being entertained right now nationally, and if so, how's that going to affect us, or are we doing things differently that we're recommending that should be considered federally?
Chair Boehne, Commissioner Simpson, I'm on the National Committee of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and there are it's being updated, and it is supposed to be authorized, approved later this year. There isn't anything that's really that much different than what's out there currently. As Administrator Gard mentioned, trespassing seems to be a big component, and nationally trespassing incidents are on the rise, so I know that the Federal Railroad Administration is looking at ways to help mitigate that. The only newer technology or component is radar or photo enforcement at railroad crossings. That is something that's new on the horizon, and that is an aspect that we are actively looking into as well.
Mr. Gard, excuse me, related to your comments about education, I very much agree with that, but I also think you need to target that education, because I know when we reopened the Coos Bay Rail line, a portion of the line is adjacent to the Oregon Dunes National Recreation Area. And our biggest problem there was ATV riders just decided that that was the quickest way between point A and point B, and they would go to the point of putting railroad ties so that they didn't have to bump over two sets of rail. So I think you need to focus on specific situations. We did it by a series of posters and going to the high schools, going to the college, And this was on our dime at the port. It wasn't a program we reached out for funding, but it did help. Helped a lot. Now, as far as trespass, I have no idea how you deal with that because we see it every day.
Yeah. Commissioner Calorie, I could not agree with you more.
Do you mind if I stand?
Go ahead.
Chair Boehne and Commissioner Calorie, actually that is a very good point, and actually I want to just highlight that recognizing the extremely limited resources, particularly in the area of education and also enforcement, we recognize the need in the plan to target very carefully, and that's where the data becomes very powerful. And we're very fortunate that we have very great data that's updated on a regular basis, unlike some other areas where there's some data challenges. And so that's a really great point, and that was a big area of our plan that I just want to highlight.
I think I'd like to open the door a little bit in terms of safety is the #1 priority for us as a commission. And if there are ways that we could be supporting educational efforts towards safety, please let us know what that is, and so that we can be leveraging, I'm looking at Director Garrett a little bit too. I don't know what that looks like, but if there's an opportunity for us to lean into this a little bit more than maybe we are today, we may want to do a focused effort to help assist getting over some hurdles here. So I'm sensitive to committing us to something that I'm unsure of, but I do want to just say that I'm opening the door. How's that?
Chair Boehne, I truly appreciate that. And we're actively having conversations with Operation Lifesaver, which is a national organization that's focused on rail safety, and we're trying to figure out, can we approach that relationship differently in a more robust and comprehensive fashion? So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all for your work. Okay. Next topic, we have the status of the Emerging Technology Impact Assessment and anticipated steps going forward. Ms. Bohart, shall I turn it over to you to guide us through this? Wonderful to see you both.
They made me nervous because they turned off the microphone. So good morning. For the record, my name is Jerry Bohart. I'm the Transportation Development Division Administrator. And just want to highlight just a little bit where we are with regards to the emerging technology, and then I'm going to turn it over to Adam Argo to really do the bulk of the presentation. I do want to acknowledge that actually the final report is in the packet that you received this morning at your seat. So for some light reading, I actually don't think it will cause insomnia, so I think it's a pretty quick read. But I think you'll find it very informative about really sort of summarizing what the conversation we had at the commission meeting back in October. One of the reasons that we did this plan to really understand emerging technologies that we recognize is really sort of that new element as we start to think about what we're going to do to update the Oregon Transportation Plan and what we're going to do to update the Oregon Highway Plan. So these elements that we're talking about here are not the only thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to the update of these two plans. But we recognize that this impact, we just had to get a little bit of a better handle on it, and we had to understand a little bit better some of where the commission was coming as we thought about this. So I just want to be really clear that this is just one part of something bigger. And so I'm just going to grab the two slides and then turn it over to Adam. But just sort of a reminder of phase one was really around what did we know about emerging tech, and then what were the impacts relative to as we think about the transportation system. So, and I think we have a slide in here later that talks about that chart where I know we had a lot of policy discussion around that level of uncertainty that might exist. I went back and really thought about the your work plan that you all approved just a little while ago. And, there's a number of things in there really when you start to think about your work plan. So certainly the update to the Oregon Transportation Plan and the Oregon Highway Plan. But I think the opportunities for intergovernmental coordination is actually the one that is sort of intrigues me the most. You're going to hear Adam talk a little bit about one of the things that we envision doing this summer, as we think about our scenario plans, is we want to have conversations with some of our sister agencies and probably our metropolitan planning organizations. We haven't gone through the whole list, but really understanding where they see the future. So how is Business Oregon thinking the economy is going to look like in 20 years? What is community housing thinking are the things that might be happening from a housing perspective in 20 years? And I think that will be really enlightening for us, because transportation is really that nexus, right, to a lot of things that happen in the state. So we've really been thinking a lot, I think, about sort of that last bullet as sort of being foundational is how we think about some of our future planning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to sort of walk through sort of the nuts and bolts of this.
Thank you, Jerry. Hello, Chair Bainey and Commissioners. My name is Adam Argo. I'm Principal Planner in the Transportation Planning Unit within TDD. It's good to be with you, and it's good to see you again. It's been 6 months since our half-day fun session on emerging technologies in Silverton. We missed you, Commissioner Callery, but if I recall, you were in Europe at the time, vacationing, so I suspect you didn't miss us. Okay. So just want to do an overview of key elements of the two phases of the Emerging Technologies Impact Assessment. I'll probably be utilizing the acronym ATIA as we go through, because we all get tired of the mouthful words for some of these plans and projects and reports. But this graphic represents where we currently are, and that is at the culminating point of phase 1 of ATIA. With the final report being our major deliverable. You'll see highlights of key milestones that we had since July of 2018, and that included the October OTC workshop on emerging technologies, which we really did take what we talked about interactively in that workshop to help us further inform that policy implications section of the final report. And I'll be talking a little bit about what we talked about again. So the main sections of the report are an exec summary, so that we really wanted to get key messages in a very digestible ways to be able to we are embracing a lot of change right now, and we are talking about a lot of complex implications behind where these technologies are going, but with an exec summary, I felt like we have some key messages that are included in there. Then there's a section on the emerging technologies and trends, followed by policy implications for Oregon. That's really what the meat of the report is. The report groups emerging technologies into 3 categories that we and our consultant team, led by Jacobs Engineering, have grouped in order to be able to kind of talk about this in a sort of organized and thematic way. Vehicle technology, and that includes automated vehicles, the connected vehicle infrastructure, and electric vehicles. Then we group things in mobility options. That includes bike share, e-bike share, e-scooter share, ride-hailing services, and what falls into what we call mobility as a service, which is a real new kind of marketplace concept for transportation. It's the integration of transportation services into a single mobility service that's available on demand. And then we also, put freight logistics and local delivery applications in their own space. And we identify in the report that there are 3 overarching technological trends that I consider they're the drivers of this great change coming about through these technologies. That's improvements in computing power, communications and networking elements, and really the increase of available data and what you may hear called big data, and the huge questions behind the fact that we have now the capability of amassing massive amounts of data and information. Huge questions, though, about the security of that data. Huge questions on privacy issues. So we try to bring that within a frame of understanding policy implications as it concerns ODOT. So bringing back to this chart that I know during the workshop our great Jacob's team led us to understand that we took this approach that we wanted to visit a set of the general goals but they relate directly to the Oregon Transportation Plan and our mode and topic plans. And it was a way for us to look at what the likely changes that are coming about from transportation technology are having on our system. In terms of, on the x-axis there, it's what level of impact are we talking about? We considered negative impacts to positive impacts, and on the y-axis, how certain or uncertain, are we about those impacts? We recognize it's impossible to predict exactly how the changing technology impacts our system. So we devised this tool to try to just kind of get our arms around it and be able to assess some key messages from the findings from researching the emerging trends and talking to the experts, as well as, the internal ODOT group project management team, just getting together and putting these on the chart. And from that, we got some understanding of the impacts that are important to us in thinking about what we call those 12 foundational goals. And I'm not going to go over all 12 of our impact findings and main takeaways, but I thought I'd highlight 3. And these are some key messages that I think we all should keep in mind here. So under safety, we expect safety to improve significantly, even with limited adoption of connected vehicle, automated vehicles. On that chart, and I know, Commissioners, we went over this in October, but I want to revisit a little bit why safety is so predominantly up there for certainty and in the positive impact. That's because assuming some penetration of automated vehicles and connected vehicle infrastructure on our system, and that type of platooning of vehicles, and also that they're very efficiently moving because of set speed, of lane assist technology, braking recognition, that we would see a precipitous drop in fatalities and serious crashes on the system. There is some realm of uncertainty, though, because that is most likely playing out when you're talking about city-to-city, more regional travel. But when you're then getting within, especially more dense urban areas, the fact that we are competing for limited space on the network across multiple modes, there's some question about what that will look like. And then under equity, and where we have it there, we find, that more transportation choices are likely to be available to many people who are unable to drive today. But the benefits may not extend to all transportation disadvantaged populations and communities that are traditionally underserved, maybe that there's poor provision of transit or other options in those neighborhoods. We need to consider that these new private companies like Uber and Lyft, and those that will provide that kind of mobility as a service platform, we need to know that they would want to hit those markets that are just as important to us, in those exurb areas, rural areas, disadvantaged communities, that they have access to those options. And then I'll just highlight transportation funding sufficiency, because integrated vehicle technology enables some degree of expansion for a user pay funding system. And some mechanisms will be identified to ensure all vehicles are paying some share of use of the roadway. But the funding continues to be constrained. And that's actually a good segue for me to harken back to the workshop, because when our consultant team, presented on the technologies themselves and the trends behind them, then we went through that chart and the policy implications exercise. Then we had our interactive discussion. These things rose to the top, and understanding the funding impacts and what a sustainable funding looks like in light of all of these technologies onboarding is a huge question for us. We also had common themes that we drew from the workshop to include aligning ODOT's efforts with other state and local agencies, anticipating the anticipated settlement patterns. We talked about how people, we don't know exactly, but if they know that some people have at their fingertips the ability to get goods delivered to them by many means and also call up rides, they could live in farther flung areas, or jurisdictions and agencies may decide it's better to have concentration of services and incentivize people to live more closely. Say in terms of transit, that would be ideal. But we need to explore that further and understand where these trends are taking us. And also, let's look a little internally here. We had a big takeaway that we need to develop skills and experience within ODOT to address emerging technologies and their myriad impacts. So now the report brings us right into phase 2. And we've actually started, but I wanted to highlight a little bit of what's coming for this year. In the phase 2 of ITIA, but also work that's happening in parallel, because this is a priming kind of project for what will be the next updates of the Oregon Transportation Plan and Oregon Highway Plan. So we had a briefing actually in Bend and Redmond last week. I was joined by Allie Lohman with the Office of Innovation as a co-presenter. She fronts the presentation, providing a lot of great stuff on the technology applications themselves with automated vehicle technology and connected vehicles. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize how well she has done in presenting that information. And we also presented at the City of Bend, hosted by Region 4 headquarters. We also that day presented to in Redmond to the COACT, Central Oregon Act, and both experiences were excellent. We got a lot of questions. We definitely can tell that on the local level, people have a lot of interest in this topic. They have a lot of interest in how ODOT is thinking and doing about it, and they have a lot of interest in being partners with us in talking about these things.
So what I want to add to that is, if you all remember from the OTC workshop, that we had dinner with our ACT chairs. And many of them, we had asked for them to sit through the workshop and hear the OTIA conversation. Mm-hmm. And so there's been, I think, different levels of outreach that between the Office of Innovation and that Adam has done to, so some ACTs have wanted that 10-minute phone call, some have wanted a little bit more in-depth briefing. So I think we're learning from that. That's going to help us, but also trying to reach out to the ACTs because at their request to get more information. So sort of serving two purposes.
And next month, we'll be doing one in Eugene to try to get a draw from Region 2 staff, but also the ACTs and hopefully MPO presence as well. And then you'll see that Emerging Technologies Peer Exchange, and Jerry alluded to this. We want to convene about a half a day to sit with our sister state agencies and understand how are they thinking about the big impacts of technology and the changes that are coming. We want to know if they're doing anything now, if they already have initiatives or strategies in place. We need to have understanding that helps us in moving forward with our next updates to the OTP and OHP, but we also hopefully will give them as enough peer exchange information so that they can consider things as it relates to them. And we also know that we'll need to scope a new contract, and this will be kind of a larger baby than what I have now. The ITIA contract is about 16 months. This one will be about maybe 2 to 3 years, and we want to get a consultant team with plenty of expert team members to be able to carry us through on those next updates to the OTP and OHP. That'll include public involvement expertise. It'll include subject matter expertise. It'll include, process expertise. So we will start scoping that. I'm starting to frame the elements now, but we'll get scoping and an RFP hopefully out this summer so that we can choose a team to get on board by later this year. And that is really just getting us to midsummer to fall highlight here is that we internally, we want to define a range of 3 to 5 alternative futures. They're planning scenarios, and they won't just be about emerging technology. we're really going broader, but we want to do it in a way that understands, all of these technological advances and changes mean something for other things that we want to consider in exploring in our scenarios. And that may include actually, unforeseen seismic events planning. It should include climate change considerations. We also want to consider aspects of our transit investments versus where the private providers of transit and the more on-demand services like Uber and Lyft come on board. So we're going to come to you later in the year, I hope, and talk about the process that we defined and the scenarios that we defined that we'll actually be taking more time to explore, because we have some sophisticated modeling tools internally that we'll employ in trying to explore these scenarios and get at some key answers. And then, or actually, to me, not key answers as much as asking the right questions and exploring uncertainty. And then we will hopefully get in front of you to approve our approach to those updates. And getting into 2020, kick off those updates, initiate a public involvement process, and form advisory groups. And I also just want to note, we know we need to do a deeper dive on some stuff. And that includes the Transportation Systems Management and Operations concept, TSMO, Mobility as a Service, and also more information on demographics and aspects of strategic resiliency. And that's all I had to go over, but we should have a few minutes, and I know we need to keep to time so you can have your lunch start at noon. Thanks.
So the only thing I'd add to a little bit of what Adam was talking to is it's not uncommon in a planning process for us to do a lot of background information before we actually figure out the process. I think there's also the awareness that with technology, things are moving faster, and the fact that we have 10, 11 modal plans, even I lose track of how many we have, topic plans. And so we actually, through this, are actually going to be thinking about, does our planning process look different as well? I don't know the answers to any of those yet, but I think it's sort of the awareness that we need to have sort of all of that on the table as we think about what does the future look like. I think some of the good news is that we're not the first state to do this. Massachusetts has done some interesting work on scenario planning, as has Minnesota, as has Florida. So we're definitely learning from our peers about sort of what were some good ideas, what in hindsight they might have done something different. So I think that will be helpful. And I think it's important to remember that scenarios, they're not alternatives. They're really about what are plausible futures. And the fact that as we go through that, we'll start to identify sort of those signposts that tell us we're leaning one way or the other. And then the question will become, is that the lean in that the state or our commission wants to go in, and what can we do to rectify that? So remember, scenario planning is not, it's sort of that plausible future, right? What might fit within that cone of influence. And the other thing I'd bring up that I didn't hear Adam say is that one of the things that we did as sort of a follow-on with regards to some of the policy discussion is we have a table within each of the sort of the 8 goal areas, and we talked about the level of influence that other entities had. So not just our agency, but the federal government, right? So when you think about connected and automated vehicles, they've got a lot of authority there. Certainly the private sector, right? Whatever Google does or Ford does or whatever, which we have limited control over, or no control, I would say. So we did that also with each of the goal areas to sort of give you a sense of who's playing in that policy arena as well. So kind of a different spin than I think we've done perhaps in the past. So just a few additional comments, but we'd like to take any questions that you all may have.
Please.
In one of your early slides, you talked about communications and networking and improvements in computing power. And yet in the last slide, I was glad to see where you talked about resiliency. And I think the recent Sno-Cats and everything else has brought that more forward. We can have all the computing power in the world, but if we can't connect because all the electrical lines are down, I'm hoping that as you look forward into these emerging technologies, that there is a way to work on better resiliency and redundancy.
It's great to hear. Thank you for that, Commissioner.
Yeah. Well, certainly sort of the whole broadband discussion that's been going on, not only impacts education, it impacts transportation, it impacts the data that we're able to collect for transportation. So you're actually, I mean, I think there's a lot of these elements that we're going to start to see a lot more coordination happening with other partners that hopefully will help us get to some of that. Because it's about resilience around certain areas, right? Communication being one of them.
So it's great to have such a talented team on point and being able to walk us through this. One of the questions, and Jerry, you noted it, our planning process takes 2 to 3 years for us to complete, and that's a fairly aggressive timeline. And at that same time, technology is changing as we are planning for it. And so thinking of even just in terms of mobility and transit, there are investments that are being made that are long-term investments, and that's either the capital expenditure of buses and different things, when we know at the same time that individuals are wanting to access services differently, and as we're trying to increase choice ridership, but also meet the needs of individuals that rely on that service. There's so many things that are happening all at once. Do you foresee some opportunities for us to be piloting and supporting communities, which I'm not sure if that came up in some of the outreach that you had done? I know certainly in our area, folks are wanting investments to look differently because they see this disruption and these new ways of moving people around coming online. So there's a desire for that. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the built environment supports it. We have the policies that protect it, and that so all of that together, I throw to you. What do you foresee in terms of the on the ground while we're planning, and the planning and how that supports the work that communities want to be engaged in? Do you see a role there?
That's a big question. One of the things that we've done, and I can't take credit for this, I have to pass it on to Amanda Peets and Stephanie Millar, is that actually some of the funding that's in our transportation options, which you guys increased to the last STIP process, they're doing what they call innovation grants. So there's a little bit of recognition of working with those providers as to what are some of the things that we can do. I think, to be honest, we're waiting a little bit to see what happens through this legislative session with TNCs and our AV task force report and sort of where that direction is going, to see if we can learn things from that. But I think right now the fundamental one is probably that innovation. And also I think the STIF program that you'll probably start to see, and there was a lean in, I think, on some of the projects that were happening through the transit providers that will get us there. And then I think that the whole TSMO discussion, sort of Galen McGill's responsibilities. There's innovations that are happening there. We're also actually working, how I got stuck on this, I don't know, but I co-chair with Bob Gephardt our subcommittee on tech and data. And so trying to think about where do we as an agency need to be going in the future. And one of the conversations we're having in April is TTI, Texas Transportation Institute, is coming forward to really talk about some of the big data that's out there and what we can use and how we can be using it. We've been using it already in some very innovative ways when we went through the eclipse, when we work on our work zones. But what is it that we really need to be gravitating to? Because I think one of the concerns that we have with some of this data is always the angst that you had this way and it was the beta and it should have been the VHS, right? And so what's the information that we need to sort of, because it's a pretty big investment, and what's the direction we need to take there? The other thing that we're recognizing too, particularly with this subcommittee, is what's the data that we need, whether you're Galen McGill or whether you're Brian Dunn doing analysis or whether you're Adam needing it for planning. So we need to figure out exactly, because again, sort of the heavy investment in that big data that's going to be helpful for us, but which is the one that we have. So I think we have bits and pieces of it, is my answer to you, Chair Boehne, but still a long way to go. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I will just note that we are getting approached by local agencies and even nonprofit interests looking to ODOT to at least be a partner on these efforts. They believe we have a place in this space, and that kind of awareness is really helpful for me. I attend these monthly meetings that are convened by Portland Metro on emerging technology with people representing their respective local agencies there, and we've been talking. They're going far with what they want to do on some automated vehicle shuttle pilots, for instance. And we're trying to position ourselves so that we would be we'll understand the right place we have in partnering or supporting their efforts. But I'm really encouraged that the knowledge sharing has been going on now for a couple years, and this is going to prime us, I think, to be really strong partners with these local agencies.
And I think with the strategic business plan and the work that we've been doing with strategic investments, and I don't have the timeline in my head, as we bring that forward to you as a commission, it's very possible that may be part of the conversation, and ultimately you all will need to make some choices, because it's probably the same amount of money. It's just how do we divvy it up, and what does it look like?
Well, just to raise Director Garrett's blood pressure a tad bit, I again would just say that I'm going to open the door a little. I don't know what it looks like, but I know that we have given a bit more funding in terms of the innovative partnership piece and working on ways that we could be enticing this type of activity. And so if there are opportunities, I would just say, communicate with us, let us know what that looks like so that we can continue to be forward thinking, and it won't be without risk, but we will have failed if we haven't tried to. So
great.
Just cracking the door open. So
that's what we want in the minutes for sure. Just kidding. Sorry, Director.
Cracking the door. All right. Anything else? Okay.
Thanks
Excellent
very
job.
much.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will go ahead and recess for lunch.